All right, hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a brand new guest. His name is Jon Paul Sydnor, and he has written an amazing book called The Great Open Dance, a progressive Christian theology. And so, Jon Paul, welcome to the podcast. It's great to connect with you.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get into the book, I'd love it if you could share maybe a little bit about yourself, general things. Who are you? What do you do in the world? That kind of thing. But also maybe a little bit about your spiritual journey. I'd love to hear a bit about how you were raised regarding God, where you're at today, and kind of what brought you to this place of writing about a book about progressive theology.
Okay. So I do have a backstory. My dad was a Presbyterian pastor. It's kind of a long story. He got out of ministry for about 10 years while I was growing up and then went back into ministry.
Hmm.
So I was when we went to church every Sunday. We sat in the front left pew every Sunday and we never missed unless, we were sick or something like that.
Right.
So very regular. And actually, it was a really nice church. I enjoyed the church tremendously. I'm just amazed when I go to some of these conferences and people talk about their experiences growing up in church, how many people have religious trauma from growing up in really bad churches.
Yeah.
My church was nice. The people were nice. We were not controlled with threats of hell. Everybody believed in Darwin's theory of evolution. It was just a good
It's the
church.
opposite of my church upbringing.
Okay, so and I look back on it fondly,
Yeah.
maybe even nostalgically.
Hmm.
Had good youth leaders. It was a nice place to grow up. Um, so so I never had to like go through the deconstruction that a lot of people have to go through
Yeah.
for theology, like getting all of these ideas out of my mind that beloved mentors had placed there, possibly lovingly, but mistakenly,
Hmm.
while I was growing up. I never had to do that, and so I feel very thankful for that. A really transformative moment for me came. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Poland from 1992 to 1994. And I went to Auschwitz and was just traumatized by going to Auschwitz. I went with a school group and I came back and I'd been reading the Bible and I just started reading the Bible exclusively. I just read it all the way through. And I did not find in the Bible what I expected to find in the Bible. Like when you're reading the Bible in response to having visited Auschwitz, you might be a little surprised and disappointed to find God commanding genocide in the Bible. But that happens. So it was very challenging, but also a very deepening experience. And one thing I found was that I was deeply inspired by the person of Jesus in the New Testament.
Hmm.
I was also inspired by Jeremiah and Isaiah and Micah and prophets like that, but deeply inspired by Jesus. And then I started reading Christian theology, and I really couldn't find Christian theology that was inspiring like Jesus.
Hmm.
I found Christian theology, but I couldn't find Christ-like theology. That was always just perplexing to me. Why isn't our theology about Christ more Christ-like? And so, I went to seminary and met my wife in seminary. She's a minister, currently a ordained minister of two churches, and I got my PhD in theology. And basically, what I've been doing since then is trying to express that original transformative inspiration that I experienced when I read the Bible straight through for the first time in 1992 to 1993,
Hmm.
probably.
Hmm.
And that's what this book is the culmination of. It's the culmination of a 35-year journey, trying to articulate, put into words kind of the inspiration and hope that I experienced the first time I read the Bible all the way through, if
That's
that
so
makes
good.
sense.
Yeah, that's so good. And this book, and I said it before we hit record, I think it's so good and so necessary. And to be honest with you, I wasn't really sure what I was going to find when I cracked open this book because the the subtitle of a progressive Christian theology can mean a lot of different things
It
depending
can.
on what progressive circle that you're in. And
Exactly.
what I wanted to share with you, and I would love if you could respond to this, but I know you follow me on Substack and stuff, and I've really been struggling with identifying as a progressive these days. And I
Hmm.
suspect maybe you can speak some wisdom to this, but you have this quote on page 9 that I just wanted to read for our listeners real quick. But you say, politically, we create negative reference groups,
Hmm.
hated others, in the
Hmm.
hope that our shared hatred of them will bind us together. And I was raised in a conservative evangelical world, far right. We didn't Darwin was it was like that was an evil name for us. But we not only hated the left, but we also hated really atheists, Muslims, LGBTQ people, and this hatred promise to bring, to unify us together for those of us who are on the right. But then I moved over to the more progressive world,
Yeah.
and in an effort to get away from that energy,
Hmm.
but quickly began to realize that now is being invited to join really in a shared hatred for the right, for
Hmm.
MAGA, for Christian nationalism, again, a hatred that promises to unify us together. And so I'm in this place where I'm just trying to figure out like how do I hold my progressive ideals differently. Like I'm pro LGBTQ, pro women, Black Lives Matter, pro choice, but like I want to hold these progressive, I think these world changing good ideas differently than the ways I used to hold them and the ways to hold my conservative ideas as well. Like I don't want to hate anymore, shame, judge. I want to be more curious. I want to be less rigid with my certainty. I want to approach life with open hands as opposed to closed fists where I feel like I have to fight everybody who sees things differently than I do. So I'm curious, like with that in mind, like kind of going into our conversation, it's an internal struggle I'm having. I know a lot of listeners have reached out and said the same kind of thing. They're struggling with that these days. But like, what are your thoughts on holding progressive ideals differently than the world might have us do? What does that look like for you through the lens of this book?
First of all, I just like to say, completely sympathetic to your position
Mm,
and completely sympathetic to your listeners' position at the same time.
mm,
Right now,
thank you.
it's a very, very challenging time, and it's a very challenging time to be prophetic and loving
Mhm.
without succumbing to anger.
Yep.
So I think that when Jesus gave us the commandment to love our neighbors, it was clearly an unconditional commandment. He wasn't. He didn't. And I've seen T-shirts that say "Love your neighbor," and then under that it says "Love your Muslim neighbor," "Love your
Mm,
gay neighbor," "Love your immigrant neighbor." Okay, that's true. And probably people like you and I need an update to that T-shirt
mm,
that says "Love your MAGA neighbor," "Love your Trump supporting neighbor," "Love your Republican neighbor,"
mm,
or whatever,
yeah.
because we need that reminder. So Jesus has given us a huge challenge, number one, and and the second part of that challenge that he gave us was to create a unified group, a group that was unified without having a negative reference group.
Mm,
Okay. And that is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge in human history. I mean, evolutionary history. We have always been united by having others that we feared and hated. That just goes back ages.
mm,
Sociologists say, if you put groups of subjects into different groups, you just form them into random groups. Within 30 minutes, those groups will start feeling slightly superior to the other groups.
mhm,
Okay. So Jesus posed a huge challenge to us, and we need to, it's not something we're going to be able to do spontaneously without awareness and spiritual self discipline.
mm,
So I'm trying to hold my progressive ideals in a confessional manner, confessing my support for the LGBTQ plus community, for a smaller gap between the rich and the poor, for protection of the environment, um, for celebration of difference. I'm trying to hold that as lovingly as possible and as inclusively as possible without reference to any negative reference group.
Mm,
And that's it's a very difficult thing to do. It's a spiritual discipline, but
yeah.
it's something that I think we're all called to work on.
Yeah. Yeah, reading this book by Jon Powell, it's called what is it called? The Power of Bridging.
Hmm.
And he talks in the book about the idea of othering and how we, tend to other these groups of people and demonize them. And he said there's this study that was recently done at like Harvard or something like that, where they connected all the wires to somebody's head to kind of analyze what their brain was doing, and they showed them a picture of a people group that they would be opposed to. And they said what was interesting is that the part of the brain that usually lights up when you see a human didn't light up,
Wow.
and meaning that it saw them as less than human, and the part that lit up in their brain was the part of the brain that lights up when it sees something it disgusts that it can't stand. And it
Yeah.
made me think to myself, like, is this like are we okay with this,
Yeah.
like as followers of Christ? Like, are we okay with looking at another human being and not even seeing really a human being, but seeing something that brings us disgust? And I was just like, it's there are things in the world that disgust me, but like I
Yeah.
want to be able to look. I feel like a progressive theology is one that is inclusive, is one that is
Hmm.
full of love, and one that brings people in as opposed to pushes people away. And these are very divided times, very heavy times, very difficult times. But what does it look like to do that? To be brave enough to have the courage to approach life in that way. So,
Well, I would bet, that you could do brain scans of people. I would bet you can do brain scans of certain people and you could not show them a group of human beings that would provoke any disgust response. Because I think there are human beings who have worked really hard to be
mhm,
universally loving,
that's right.
universally inclusive, and universally egalitarian, believing
Yeah.
in the equality of all people.
Mm,
And I think there are people who have been raised in environments that really resisted othering and resisted the dehumanization of people they disagreed with.
yeah,
And so I think that people coming out of those environments, and then, or even people coming out of othering environments who commit themselves to change,
that's right.
I'm guessing they can see any picture of any group of human beings and still see that compassionately rather than with rather than with disgust. I think a big part, I mentioned the word confessional
Mhm,
earlier. I tried to do this in my book, which is that I try to confess an inclusive, universalist, egalitarian theology. And I try to minimize my polemics, my arguments against.
mhm,
So, and it's partly because polemics don't seem to do a lot of good, number one. But also because I want to create not so much a position against as a position for that might lure people into a more agapic theology.
yeah, that's right. We tend to talk a lot about what we're against and very little for what we're for, right?
Right. And there were a few times where I had to argue,
Sure.
I had to talk about what I was against. I mean,
Yeah,
against eternal conscious torment.
yeah.
The concept of hell is God torturing people forever,
I grew up with that.
which, yeah, absolutely. A lot of people grew up with that.
Yeah.
And it's extremely harmful, and people have nightmares from it, religious trauma from it.
Yeah,
And I just felt like I had to argue against that.
sure.
So there were a few times I did get polemical, but I tried to make the book generally confessional.
That's right. So one of the big points the book makes is that it paints this picture of, you call it a theology of progress, which I think
Hmm.
is like a brilliant way to depict progressive theology, because the word is right there in
Right.
progressive, and what it really should be all about. This idea that the Christian faith is not stagnant, it hasn't arrived at some magical endpoint, but it continues to change and grow, as God's imagination changes. And even I think as it grows, I should say, and as science tells us, the universe is even expanding and continuing to grow. So wondering if you could
Correct.
talk to us a little bit more about this idea of a theology of progress, and maybe how this particular idea can really fit into our current religious and political landscape, that we find ourselves in.
So one of the goals of my book was to celebrate human being as it is.
Hmm.
I do think the church made a good decision when it rejected Christian ideals as escaping from the body into the soul, from escaping from matter into the spirit, escaping from time into eternity, stuff like that. So I really wanted to celebrate our being as a gift, and our being is embodied, it's material, and it takes place through time. So, and I remember, I was getting this sense that a timeless eternity was better than time. And just I got that kind of from my church, from the Bible. I don't know where I got it from. I remember reading this, somebody wrote somewhere, I'm thankful to God for the time through which we exist. And I was like, oh wow, that's a different perspective.
Mm.
So why is time good? And what do we do with time? And I think that time is good because, I mean, it's for many reasons. It is the medium of loving relationship. So we love through time. And I think that love necessitates change, and change is the medium of time. It's how we interact with people. It's how we have conversations with people. It's how we, in a good conversation, you disappear from yourself and the other person disappears from themselves, and you both give yourselves over to the conversation that both of you are creating, but neither of you are controlling,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So that's an example of time at its best, a deep, meaningful conversation.
Mm.
But that can apply to any type of interaction. So we're also called to progress through time. And how do I define progress? So we progress as individuals toward the best person that we can be, the best self that we can be, the most generous, loving, confident, and secure self that we can be. But we also progress as societies toward the most just society that we can be. And a just society includes everyone. It doesn't leave anybody hungry. It doesn't exclude people for based on the color of their skin or their creed or age or any condition. And it's egalitarian. It celebrates equality. It doesn't celebrate equality just as an abstract ideal. It celebrates equality as the means by which everyone is given the opportunity to flourish.
Mm.
Because the kingdom of God, which is the reign of love, is a kingdom of universal flourishing. And it's something we are not at yet. It's something we have made progress toward, but we are not, we are very far from. We have a long way to go. And if we work through it, then that work grants our lives the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, which is a spirit of love, also a spirit of meaning and purpose.
Mm.
It can also create in us, that type of work for a more just society can also create in us frustration and exhaustion.
Mm.
But we are nevertheless called to that work, not called to put our heads in the sand and not called to just leave things be because we personally are not being harmed by injustice. We
Mm.
to experience the Spirit of Christ, the Holy Spirit, um, we need to work for better selves and a better society.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I feel like that's what I want to sign up for, as a progressive person, like someone
Hmm.
who we tend to think of like progressive and conservative as like opposite sides who have arrived at their own end point. Like this is how the conservatives do things, this is how the progressives do things. But I think having this idea that, progressive theology is a theology of progress. It's constantly moving. It's always on the move. And I think that
Correct.
that really aligns with the message of that we find in Jesus. I mean, Jesus's followers are called followers of the way. They weren't
Hmm.
followers of the end point, that they arrived at
Correct.
some magical place, but they were followers of the way, meaning that Jesus's path is a way. It's a path. It's you walk the path, and you every time you walk, you continue to make progress towards something, and you don't necessarily arrive there. And I think that's the point is it's a journey, right? I think the point isn't necessarily the arrival at the end point, but the journey of getting there and developing and constantly becoming more and more of who we have been created to be. And I think that that's such a beautiful idea to embrace as opposed to having another set of doctrines, another set of theologies that you have to sign up for and everything like that in order to call yourself this progressive or whatever it might be. So I appreciate that idea of a progress, theology of progress.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a concept of truth as
Hmm.
something that moves, right? And
Yep.
Jesus is the truth. What does Jesus do? He moves.
Yep.
He walks from place to place. He preaches in different places. He preaches different sermons based on who he's preaching to and the situation. He gives different advice and has different responses based on the situation. So there's no type of static, substantial, inflexible truth here. In
Mm.
Jesus, you find something, a truth that adapts itself to circumstances and moves and changes and always creates new beauty in different ways.
That's right. So how does the Trinity fit into this? Because you talk a lot about the Trinity in your book. Three persons, one God. No perfect explanation or illustration of how to describe it. But, would you talk a little bit about how the what the Trinity is and what the Trinity can teach us about this idea of a theology of progress and how we as humans can best navigate the world that we live in a way that's fashioned after the divine's own heart?
Sure. So I'll have to simplify a little bit,
Yeah, you can't. We can
obviously.
barely scratch the surface. We've
Sure.
talked a lot about it.
Basically, there are two models of the Trinity. You can have kind of a monopersonal model
Mhm.
where God is one person, expressing God's self in three unique ways. The danger of that model is modalism, where God just isn't really three, just kind of appears to be three at different times. And then there's another model, which is sometimes called the social model or the Eastern model, um, which is that God is three persons, like his actual unique subjective centers of consciousness, united through love into one God. And the danger of that model is tritheism, that you're worshiping three gods instead of one. Now, what I have noticed, there are two reasons why I've come to strongly favor the tripersonal Trinity or the social Trinity. One reason is that it has made greater sense for me in life. I've been better able to understand and analyze life through applying the social model of the Trinity to my own life and my situations and society at large, etc. So that's one reason. The other reason I was attracted to the social model of the Trinity is because a lot of Christian theologians, and then one of the main ones I really drew on was, well, two of them were Moltmann and Leonardo Boff, who's a liberation theologian. They use these relations between the persons of the Trinity, which are vulnerable, open, loving, risk taking, supportive. They use those relations within the Trinity. And then they argue that since we are made in the image of the Trinitarian God, we are made for Trinitarian relations. And we are called to express those Trinitarian relations, which are relations of equality, openness, vulnerability, and trust. And we're called to express them in our own social relations, whether that's within the household or within society at large. So now you have a model. We're made in the image of God. And to the degree that we stray from that image, we're going to find our lives less fulfilling.
Mm,
To the degree that we fulfill that image, we will find our lives more fulfilling.
mm,
And frankly, I think that's true. I mean, if I didn't think it's true, I wouldn't have written an entire book about it. So, my hope is that by seeing ourselves as called to fulfill loving community in whose image we were made, we can also fulfill our own deepest nature, which will grant us the lives that God has always intended, the abundant lives
mm,
that God has always intended for us to have.
mm. Yeah, so good. How then do you, I mean, to model your life after that really requires you to be vigilant when it comes to love, right?
Yeah.
I mean that's that another explanation point in your book is, just on the concept of love. Like how And talk to us like on a practical level, like what does it look like for you, John Paul, in your life and in your ministry in these times? Like, what does it look like for you to remain vigilant when it comes to love? Like we talked before about, having that t-shirt, love your neighbor with the asterisk at the bottom with all these different lists of things. Like, what does it look like for you to remain vigilant in that especially when I imagine you feel the pressure as well as someone who identifies as a progressive to, carry yourself in a certain way in these times and talk not just about certain things, but in certain ways about certain things and to, you know, have a certain high level of emotion about different things. Like, what does it
Yeah.
look like for you to model your own life after that?
Well, it's extremely difficult. I'm not gonna I
Okay,
have
good. So
no
we're not alone.
I have no easy pat answers for you whatsoever. And part of what's difficult is that I have transgender friends, I have transsexual, post-operative transsexual friends. Um, I have students who are transgender, and they they were used as a group to fear successfully in our last presidential election, and that made me very angry. I was angry for them. And if you look at the prophets and you look at Jesus, being angry for harmed, oppressed people is an appropriate anger.
Mhm,
Okay, if the anger serves love, it is appropriate.
mhm,
If anger serves itself, it is inappropriate. It's dangerous. Okay, so you always have to remember, and this is what's very difficult, that anger that serves love is penultimate. It's a means to an end. It is a something that needs to go away,
mhm,
and you need to make sure that you're always being more loving than you are angry.
mhm,
Now, that being said, I mean, I've expressed my anger a few times in the presence of some of my friends who are sexual minorities, and they have felt loved through my expression of my anger.
mhm,
And so I'm not ruling out anger as an emotion. What I'm saying is it needs to be encapsulated, needs to be controlled by and directed by love.
mhm,
But it can be an energizing principle. It can get us to, call our senators, call our representatives. It can get us to march. It can get us to put flags outside our houses and stuff like that.
mhm,
We need to do everything um, as lovingly as possible. And if some of our love becomes an angry, helpful attitude, mutualistic attitude toward those who are being harmed, that's okay. Just make sure that it's a means to an end and not an end in itself.
So what does it look like then? You express your anger when you're with these people who are obviously being marginalized. Um, they're being abused verbally, physically. They're fearing for a lot of people fearing for their lives in these times. Like, what does it look like it's one thing I feel like to have that anger in a closed door space where you're with those people and you're expressing that anger and your frustration for them, like you said.
Sure.
When you get out into the world and you're having maybe somebody's working in a space where, they're a more progressive thinker, they're working with people who are, big Trump supporters and big MAGA
Hmm.
people, and you get into those conversations with people. And I feel like that's where so many people struggle with how do I look at this person and not, and not see something that disgusts me when they're telling me all these different things about the people back in that room that I was just in expressing my anger to them. Like they're coming at those people. Their mindset is putting those people's lives in danger. Like, what does it look like to then engage in that conversation? So you take the anger out of that room, Now you're in the real world, you're face to face with somebody who sees something very differently than you do. Like, what does that look like? What does it look like to enter into that discussion with this mindset of the Trinity and taking all this into a real life situation? Again, there's no pat answer. I realize that.
There's no
But
pet answer, and
yeah.
I am the last person to hold myself out as a spiritual hero in any way whatsoever. I just want to make
Mm,
sure you know that. So I think another tact. So I think being confessional rather than polemical,
mhm,
as much as possible, is the most successful tack that you can take. Okay, because what and you need to remember, we all have to remember right now, especially right now in history, how much progress has been made. Okay, and I'm not going to list the entire history of human social progress, but we can look at, in 1910, most people didn't think women should vote.
mhm,
Okay, and going back to 1850, most most Americans thought that it was okay for blacks to be slaves. Okay, you go forward to the 1950s, and most Americans weren't really concerned about whether blacks could vote or not. And then you go forward into the 80s and 90s, and you have people saying um, gays should have the right to get married, and
mhm,
you have people saying that's heretical and sinful and wrong and will tear our society apart. All of those are over now. Okay, so when I say they're over, I'm not saying we've reached the goal.
mhm,
I'm saying we have come a long way. We need to realize how far we've come, and we need to remind ourselves of how far we have to go still. So, with the progress we've made, realize that we're going to continue to make progress.
mhm,
And how did they make progress? They really, if you talk about the suffragettes or Martin Luther King or the leaders of the LGBTQ plus rights movement, they did not make progress by aggressively, angrily arguing for their positions.
mhm,
They made progress two ways: through calm, reasoned argument. That was one way. That was not the most effective way. The most effective way that we've produced change all along was by, be it women wanting the vote, or blacks wanting freedom, or later the vote, or um, queer persons wanting rights, civil rights. They've gotten it by confessing who they are and saying, look at me. You're demonizing me. I'm just a human, just like you.
mhm,
I'm no different from you. I don't pose a threat to you. I just want the same. I don't want special rights. I just want the rights that you are currently enjoying.
mhm,
And over time, that approach produces change. And it always produces change. And I know right now a lot of people are feeling hopeless
mhm,
that change is possible, or that they feel that change is impossible. What I'm saying is, if you just step back, take the long view, and look at the history of human social progress, it has happened, it will continue to happen, and it needs patient, loving, persevering activists to make it happen. And
right.
that's who we're called to be.
That's so good. And I read a story not that long ago, and I don't remember the guy's name, but he was a black man, and he actually would he made a it was part of his daily routine or his weekly routine, whatever, where he would go and intentionally find members of the Ku Klux Klan,
Hmm.
and he would talk with them. And everybody's like, how in the world could you possibly do that? Because you're the very person who these people hate the most. And he would take them out for coffee. He would take them out for
Hmm.
lunch, and he would sit with them. And to your point, he wouldn't argue. He wasn't, I'm going to argue my case for you, but it was very confessional in the sense that he would just share his story, but then he would ask them to share their story. And it didn't work every single time, but there were
Sure.
multiple cases where he said these people took off their hoods, so to speak, and they
Hmm.
realized that once they sat down with somebody who they were raised to hate
Hmm.
and they heard their story and they each saw their mutual humanity, even if they ended up still having differences at the end of the day, they had a deeper appreciation for the person in this, the soul that's buried in the skin. And I think that's just such a powerful thing because so many times, and I know this in myself, and I put myself at the top of this list, but it's so tempting when you come across somebody who starts talking about things that you adamantly disagree with in your mind. In my mind, I'm already building the argument of
Yeah.
how I'm going to answer and
Hmm.
what facts I'm going to throw at them and what figures I'm going to think and what books I'm going to quote or whatever, and not really hearing the person and just asking that one more question, of tell me more about why you feel that way.
Yeah.
Help me understand more about how you came to that conclusion. Like you must have, did you read about it somewhere and you came to the conclusion? Did something happen in your life that brought you to that conclusion? Like try to understand that person. I just think that story of this man and sitting down with the KKK is an extreme example. Obviously, I mean, it's not happening every day, but I feel like just that extreme example, if we can take the heart of that and carry that into our daily lives and into our daily conversations, what good might come from that?
Oh, it's a fabulous story. I watched a documentary with a young brown Muslim female, made a documentary about um, white nationalism in America,
Mhm.
and it was just amazing because she went to them and interviewed them and talked to them and made friends with some of them, and some of them left because they met her and realized that she was human. And then the other thing that she points out, which is very important, is she never demonized them. You know, she talked about them and she talked to them, but she never demonized them. And
Mhm.
what one thing she revealed, and that you just can't realize through watching the documentary, so many of these people are the products of childhood trauma.
Mhm.
You know, they suffered violence as children at the hands of their parents or neighbors or other kids or whatever. And a lot of them have had struggles in life. They might have poor self esteem. And somebody comes along and says, I can give you self esteem, I can give you community. And if you join us, nobody's ever going to bully you again,
Mhm.
right? It's attractive. That's going to be attractive to a lot of people. And you're not going to get them out of there by telling them how immoral or stupid or unpatriotic they are. It's just not an effective approach.
There's that saying, hurt people, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and I think like that's something I've been trying to, you know, just in how I talk about the people who I disagree with. Because once the doors close at home and you're in your four walls with people who think just like you, it's easy
Yeah.
to just let it fly.
Yeah.
But I've really been trying to be mindful about like how do I speak about, I mean, just someone like let's just say like Donald Trump, and it's like there's two questions for me to ask. One is, what is wrong with you? Right? Like
Yeah.
what in the world is wrong with you that you would say the things you say, do the things you do? That's one question to ask. But the other question is, what happened to you? And I
Yeah.
feel like that's for me, like that's something I've been trying to when I hear him talk, when I see him pop up on my phone and there's another article about another thing, it's asking that question like what happened to him to bring him to this space? And even if that just opens up a small light in my heart to shine some some light in his direction and
Yeah.
hope that whatever it is that happened, he's able to find some kind of healing for it. Like I feel like that's just again, like that's a challenging way for me to live because I've been taught as a conservative and as a progressive to live very differently than that. But I feel
Hmm.
like that's just a much different way to, I still have the same ideals. I still feel like I have the same values, but I feel like that's a much different and more, I feel like that's progress in the terms of how I'm holding it.
Yeah. You talk about spiritual heroes, which I've specifically denied being one, and I will continue to deny.
Mhm.
But you know, we have a woman in our church who very much shares your and my political views, and she prays for Donald Trump and Elon Musk significantly every day.
Mhm.
And she's just very mature, spiritually mature, generous, and you can tell that when you meet her. that she's at I don't know how to say it. She's in touch with God. You know that when you meet her,
Mhm.
and it's powerful.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing story, and I mean that's something that I mean it's easy to pray for the leaders that you like, right? Like I found like it was
Correct.
much easier to offer up a prayer for Joe Biden than it is for Donald Trump. But I think it's those are the spiritual heroes I think that we need. And I think we need to not just hear from them, but really allow ourselves to meditate on those ideas and like just watch what they're doing, how they're speaking,
Yeah.
and try to adopt some of that into our lives. You have another quote that I just want to read real quick as we get ready to wrap up, but as you were talking, I was looking for it and I found it. It's on page 40. You say, contemporary humans expand spiritually by chasing the horizon, trusting that new ways of being await us. And like our distant ancestors, we experience this movement as a journey homeward toward a land that is where we are supposed to be. Rejecting the path of least resistance, faith instead chooses the path of most promise. And I love that, just that idea of chasing the horizon and trusting that new ways of being await us. And I think that's just so, I don't know, I feel like that just fits so well again with where I'm at in my journey because I can't tell you how many people have said to me like, well, if you're gonna imagine if they would have built bridges in the Civil War. Imagine if
Yeah.
they would have built bridges, during, um, when racism was at its highest back when Martin Luther King Jr. and things like that. And imagine if they would have taken that approach. We'd still, or with the Nazis, we'd still have ovens, we'd still have all this stuff. And I said, I realized that. I said, but at the same time, did does verbally and even physically violent pushback really solve the world's problems? Because if it did, would we still be having the same conversation like all these years later? Like I realize that we've made progress for sure. Things are not the way that they were. I said, but the energy is still there. And I said, so that makes me think that as we look towards the horizon and we travel into the depths of 2025 and eventually 2026, 2027,
Yeah.
what other ways of being await us that we have yet to discover? And I think we need people who are loud. We need people who are very vocal. We need that. I said, but I
Hmm.
think we also need the creative spirits to rise up and to wonder about different ways of being. And I said, I think somebody like that woman you just described, that's a creative way of being in these times. And I think if we can just pause our loudness and our desire to really speak our minds and watch that lady and wonder, I wonder if there's something there that I can adopt into my way of being as I progress into the future. And I think that if we all hit that pause button and we admired those spiritual heroes, like you said, and we adopted some of that into our own place, again, what could happen as we move towards the horizon? I feel like that's what your book has inspired me with. So that's my big takeaway.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And I do feel like there are better ways of being ahead of us and that we can create them and
Yeah.
that our abundant life comes in co-creating them with one another in deep human community and with God as well. So, and that's what gives me hope. That's what keeps me energized. And that's what keeps me on track, keeps my anger encapsulated, if you will, is that knowledge and that being blessed with that purpose, which
Hmm.
is a grace, number one, and then being known that along the way, um, I'm loved unconditionally.
Hmm.
Two, and that in response, which is another grace, and that the third grace is the if you have the grace to share that with the world, including with those with whom you disagree.
Yeah.
That's a big challenge, not easy, but definitely, I think. I mean, the word "worth it" doesn't even. It makes it sound transactional
Hmm.
almost. It's that is where we are supposed to be.
That's right.
while we are journeying. That's where we're supposed to be.
That's right. So good, John Paul. We're just about out of time, but this has been loads of fun. I appreciate you, your book, I appreciate your work. Thank you for making time for us.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, Glenn. The podcasts are funny because I feel like now you know me, but I don't know you at all. So I think there should be a podcast where I interview you
Oh boy.
because this has all been too one-sided for my taste.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we could do it again. You can ask me some questions too.
Awesome,
That'd be a lot of fun.
awesome.
And real quick, is there any place where you want to direct people to find you online, interact with your work? I know you're on Substack.
Yeah, the few places. I'm on Facebook under Jon Paul Sydnor. I'm on Blue Sky under Progressive Christianity. And I'm on Substack as Jon Paul Sydnor and also under Progressive Christian Theology. So if anybody wants to email me, my email address is johnpaulsydnor@gmail.com. So that's it.
Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes and we'll do it again.
Thank you, Glenn. It's great
Thank
talking
you.
to you.